At any given time, there's tons of different trends and design styles that are in demand on Etsy. Sometimes they're super obvious, like when the In My Era trend blew up last year. Sometimes they're more subtle, and sometimes they only show up in certain niches or aesthetics. In any case, one of the most important skills in print on demand is being able to spot the demand or trend style and then integrate that with an ideal buyer in a way that will resonate with them and create a deeper connection. So for today's video, I'm going to pull together a few different trends and styles that I'm seeing in my own research and show you exactly how I would connect them to a specific niche. And I'm going to create designs in a batch so that you'll get to see several different designs in one sitting. In case we haven't met yet, my name is Mandy. I've started and stopped multiple entrepreneurial adventures in the span of more than a decade and learned a lot along the way. My goal now is to provide you with strategies to simplify the journey so that you can stop the overwhelm, start making progress, and thrive with your print-on-demand business. While growing a six-figure print-on-demand business alongside a six-figure handmade business, one of the strategies that was key for me was to work in batches. This allowed me to work very efficiently, even on the days when I had very little time to spend working on growing my business. I batched my research, I batched my designs, I batched my mockups, I batched my listing process, and I even batched the processing of orders. Batching and working in what's called time blocks reduces the amount of context switching that your brain does when you switch from task to task. This ultimately allows you to stay more focused, and therefore your workflow is a lot more streamlined. So for today's design batch, I'm going to be taking inspiration from a few different design styles that are very much in demand right now on Etsy. When I'm doing research and looking for demand, I look for the popular now badges, bestseller badges, and even more importantly, those little red magic words that show up inside a listing before badges might even appear. As I researched, I noticed a lot of design elements with checkered patterns, bright retro colors and fonts, tons of florals, varsity fonts, front and back designs, mascot styles, and different font duos. I will be keeping each of these in mind as I work on my design batches. The niche that I'm going to design for today is for the cheer coach. This unsaturated niche has tons of potential, as you can see here in E-Rank, for cheer coach shirts as well as cheer coach gifts. So let's get to designing. For today's, I'm going to start in Kittle so that I can use their infinity boards. So I've just created an initial artboard here for the size that I need. And then I want to do my first design as almost kind of a Y2K or 90s vibe, which uses a lot of kind of checkered patterns. So I've just typed in elements and looked for checkered, and then I can also change the color of these different elements. And I'm going to expand this a bit. Then I've just pressed T on my keyboard to add in text. And because this is for a cheer coach, I'm going to just start with the word coach and go from there. Change the font to just kind of a retro style, and I'm going to change the color to something really bright so that it will stand out against the checkered background. Also going to create an outline effect, and I can do that by decreasing the angle, and I'm going to just adjust the offset a little bit and adjust the angle until I get just a little bit of a shadow. And then I'm going to add an outline to the outside so that again it really stands out against that checkered background. Readjust and center. And I'm just changing the background of the artboard so that I can see it a little bit better. And then I'm going to add in some elements that are going to be reminiscent of a cheer coach. So in this case, I've got pom-poms. I actually pulled this image in from Creative Fabrica and I converted it to a vector so that I can change the colors here. And one of the cool things about Kittle is you can actually do a linear gradient from the color menu, and that means I can make a cool gradient like this. And because we are working with print on demand and direct to garment, the colors will actually work really well as a gradient when it prints. So I'm just going to play around with the colors here and get a nice contrast going, still in that bright kind of 90s Y2K color scheme. I'm going to play around with that just a little bit. You can add in multiple step colors here, and you can also adjust the colors if you want to move the gradient around. So there's a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed playing around with this part of it lately because you can create some really fun effects with it. Once I've got my colors set up the way that I want to, I'm actually going to start just playing around with this design a little bit to add some other elements. So because these are pom-poms, I think I want to actually have 2 in here. So I've just duplicated, rotate those a little bit just so that they've got some differences there. Align those right behind my coach and get that nice and centered. Then I'm also going to bring in this checkered lightning bolt, which again I also got from Creative Fabrica. And so I want that nice and close to the center. So I'm actually going to make it look like it's kind of going right between those letters. So to do that, I've actually separated them a little bit so that I can have that lightning bolt. And I'm just going to readjust everything. And I'm happy so far with what that looks like. So now I'm going to move on to another design, and I want to do just a slight variation of this one. So I've literally just been able to copy and paste the entire artboard and slide it right next to it as part of the infinity board. And I'm going to just change the colors here a bit, and now I want to do the gradient on the actual text. So you can do this for both elements as well as text. And now because I've got that gradient on that front part of the text, I'm going to change the pom-poms behind it to be more solid so that they really stand out. And then I'm going to just kind of play around with the coloring a little bit on this coaching text. And what this is doing is it will give me a similar but slightly different design and different color scheme, so then when I list these, it will give me another option and I can ultimately see which version performs the best. So now I'm going to move on to another design in this batch. The next design style that I'm going to do is one that you've probably seen on Etsy, but I'm going to do a different variation of it. And again, this is all about taking designs and styles that I know are working well on Etsy and doing something different. So I'm going to repeat Coach multiple times, and I'm going to make a wavy design with it and then add some other elements. So for this, I want the back to be kind of that retro font, which again is a font that we know performs well on Etsy. And then I'm going to duplicate this first one just so that I have 2 in a row to start with and get that centered. And then I'm going to start at the top with this first one and use the distort. And I'm going to start pushing those levers in different directions so that they start to wave together. I might change up each of them a little bit, but essentially I want them to line up with their wave. And so I'm going to duplicate each one of these, make sure they're all centered as I go, and I'm going to fill out this page. Duplicate it one final time to fill it out, and then for this bottom one, I'm going to turn off the distort just so I can readjust and create a straight line at the bottom, just so that it creates a nice rectangle and fill out the space. Then I want to use one of the other elements from another design, so I'm going to zoom out and grab it from my other artboard, duplicate it, and bring it in here. I really like that pop of color. It still brings in that kind of Y2K color scheme, but in a different way and on this more of a retro text background with the wavy text. So add that in the middle. I'm going to adjust these a little bit to again really take up that space. I'm envisioning that this would likely be on the back of a t-shirt or sweatshirt. So I really want it to fill that space well. And then I'm also going to bring in that lightning bolt again, just to again create another variation of what I started with, but still within a similar theme, because one of these designs, when I list them, could take off more than others, and that will give me a clue of which design styles are working well for this particular niche that I'm designing for, and so I can really pay attention to what customers ultimately respond to. As I said, I envision this could be something on the back, so if I wanted to create a front option, I could do that. I'm going to create just a smaller artboard off to the side. I'm going to grab part of a previous element. If it's on the front pocket area, I want the bottom to be more of the straight edge, so I can grab that, bring that into this smaller pocket design. Maybe I change this to cheer because I already have that transformation in place. It's simply replacing the text and keeping that same shape. And then I can pull over maybe one or two of these pom-poms and bring that in and move it into the design. I could, in theory, also have this be a customization, so I could even have another variation of this for the front where I add in a name option to the template. So there are a lot of different directions that I could go with this. I could even use this large design on the front and not have a back as well as just a separate listing option to play around with it. For the next design that I'm going to go with more of that varsity letter trend and create an arch with it. This is something that I see a lot on Etsy, so we're going to do a different take on this. One of my favorite varsity fonts in Kindle is this tricot, so I'm going to do that. Expand this so that it's a nice large text. I could just do cheer, I could just do coach. For this one, I'm going to combine them just so that it's really clear who the target audience for this is. And then I've turned on the arch transformation and I'm just making adjustments until I get it to a nice arch based on what I typically see out on Etsy doing well. The next thing that I want to do with this one is I want to create a nice bold border around the text. You can do this from the main settings. I like to make a border from the effects because I can do it without shrinking the inner text. So what I mean by that is I expand this outline width and I turn that offset all the way down so that there's no shadow. I'm just getting the border. And I'm going to bring in those bright colors that I've been using for this particular audience. We'll carry that through to this one. I'm going to change the center color of the text to white, just so that that pink outline really stands out. And then for this design, I want to include some humor. And I do this in a few different ways. If I'm not familiar with a niche, I like to use ChatGPT for this. I've got several prompts that I use and I'll link them for you below if you want access to that. But for this one, I thought the humor would be great and I chose cheer coach because I'm too loud for yoga. So I thought that would work really well for this target customer. I like to use a different font if I'm creating a secondary part of a design. And I do that, so if I've got a really big, bold font, or if I've got even a script font, then the secondary font that I will use for the duo is going to be something a little different. So varsity fonts have kind of the edges to them. They're a little bit bolder. And so I went with just a skinnier text that is very simple, just so that it creates a nice visual duality in the design. And then if I wanted to add some personalization to this, I can add in just a small little text box here in the middle. I found an oblong shape in the elements, and so I'm going to create it similar to what you would see in more of a traditional varsity style design. And I'm going to just have an established year in the center, and this can then be personalized for the customer as part of the listing, and I can really leverage that ability to customize this design. So we'll center that, and that looks about right. And then I'm changing the font so that it matches the cheer coach and fits with the university style. And then to really make it stand out, I'm not going to make this text transparent. I'm simply going to make it match the color that I already have in the other outline, so it creates almost an inverse effect between those two colors. One final adjustment, center everything, and that is another design in our batch that's ready to go. So we'll start another one and get that going. For these next couple of designs, I'm going to take on a different color palette. Color palette that does really well is kind of in that boho realm, softer, more muted color palette. So first, let's get our text in there. I'm going to do Coach for this one, and again, I'm going to bring in a dual font. So I'm going to go the route of the varsity font again, and I'm actually going to make these individual letters because I've decided that I'm going to alternate their colors. That is another popular thing out on Etsy as a design style, but again, we're just going to put our own spin on it so that it looks different, and we're going to do it in this niche that is not as saturated with those design styles. We're going to bring this style to it. So I'm adding in individually each of the letters so that I can then independently change each of them. Once that is nice and centered, I want that nice and large because it will be the main dominating part of the design. Then I'm going to grab some different colors. You could go through and select them individually. I like to head over to Google or even Pinterest and type in a palette. So I just typed in boho color palette, and then I grabbed one from the images selection that had a color palette with what I was looking for. This one I thought went really, really well with this and had a variety of different colors that I can then leverage as part of this design for each of the letters. So I'm simply changing each of these individually using the color picker in Kittle, and then from there I want to add a border to each of these. And I'm going to do a dual border. So the first thing for a dual border is I'm going to make a white border first under the text. And then I'm going to make a border under the effects by lowering the offset all the way and increasing the outline. So now you can see that there's a slight gap between the main color of the letter and the outer color of the letter, and there's a white in the middle. So then I simply need to repeat this for each of the other letters. This is one of those things where had I decided to do it in the beginning, I could have just created one and duplicated them. Since sometimes I will change designs like this on the fly as I'm just designing and letting the creativity free flow, this is one where it's just going to be faster for me to go through and simply copy and paste in all of the exact elements that I did on the first letter. Either way works. Then once I've got all of the letters completed and they match nicely, I don't need my reference image anymore for the colors, so I can get rid of that. And then I want to add in a dual font in another word. So here's where I'm going to bring in cheer in this case, and I'm going to change the font to something that's more of a script. And this is where I was talking about using different fonts to make one stand out, but also have a nice clean design. Typically, I don't do more than 2 to 3 different fonts in a single design, but it can add a nice variety and it adds a nice visual appeal and allows you to create something that's slightly different from what's on the rest of the market. Platforms like this do have a lot of fonts to pick from. You can also import fonts as well. But it's a great place to play around with it. I will typically go through the process like this and try out a few different variations until I land on one that really sparks my interest and works really well. In this case, I really like this font. It's something different. It's not quite as spread out as we sometimes typically see with this style of design. So I think that will work really nicely. Another design I'm going to make in this batch is going to be similar, but now again I'm going to, instead of just a simple dominant design, I'm going to add a text phrase underneath that again is going to even more deeply connect to this customer. So again, I've come up with a phrase. I used ChatGPT to help me with this, but this one was cheer coach like a regular coach, but with more pep. This is something that we typically see sometimes in the mom niche, for example. You'll typically see designs like a regular mom, but cooler. So we're taking that concept that's popular in another niche and we're bringing it into this other niche, and we're doing it in a way that connects very specifically to them. The whole concept of pep with a cheer coach, that is a cheer terminology. So again, we're leveraging this trendy design concept, but doing it in a different way and creating a deeper connection with our ideal buyer. So again, think about that as you're designing. You want your designs to create that connection. Moving on to another design in our batch. For this one, we're going to go in a slightly different direction, and I'm going to start with a template. So I just started looking through the t-shirt templates until there's one that really caught my eye. I'm going to start with this one, and I've got an idea in mind based on a phrase that I got, again, from my handy ChatGPT phrases. So I'm going to delete a few of the elements that I don't need here just yet. Keep smiling is part of my phrase. And then for the top, we're going to use this arch for a phrase of throw high, catch low. Again, thinking about cheering and some of that terminology that we got with the help of ChatGPT. And I'm going to use this arch here in the center. Arches are something that I frequently see doing well on Etsy, so I want to leverage that as part of this design, and it will curve around a main focal point that will eventually be in the middle here. So I'm just adjusting this arch. You can use this custom transformation to essentially keep pulling on those little levers and little dots until you get the arch in the way that you want it to be. I'm going to move this down and make room for the image that will go in the center. For this one, we're going to use the help of AI. So I like to use Kittle AI sometimes, depending on what I'm looking for. If I can't find an image exactly with what I'm looking for, so let's take a look with that. Kittle lets you choose a style. So one of the things that I'm envisioning with this design is basically a mascot in the middle, either some sort of smiling flower or perhaps a smiling cheer palm. Just to really, again, bring in those elements. I can choose a mascot from the style, and then I will typically run this a few different times. AI prompts, you get a little something different every time. So I look for one that makes the most sense with what I'm going for. And these were some of my favorites, and then I'll just narrow it down from here. I kind of like this one with the flower and the smiling face, so I use the background remover feature. I'm going to center it. Now, because I'm making this much larger, if I really zoom in on this, you'll see that it's kind of blurry. And I want to make sure this is a clear image. So Kittle has an AI image upscaler. And when I do that, if you watch really, really close, the image becomes super clear once that upscaler works. Now you can see it's a very crisp design. So I know that the resolution will work really well in that final print. So expand that out. I'm going to adjust it to make it look like, again, I'm bringing in those little concepts of checkers that are trending and arches that are trending and mascots that are trending. I'm combining these in a way that will speak to this ideal buyer and will be different and add value to the market from what's already there. That is how you create new and different designs for your customers. And make one final change here. I really want this bottom part to really stand out. Again, kind of that concept of cheering and lots of smiling. So throw high, catch low, keep smiling will be this final part of the phrase. Make a few little adjustments to some of the other elements that were already in here that I still like and want to keep. I'm going to change the color of this text. I use the color picker to match it with the pom-poms in the image. I'm going to, again, add a little bit of a border in here. I'm going to make it stand out just a little bit more. I might make it a different color. Make sure that's nice and centered. And then I'm going to make this just a little bit taller in terms of text. So I can use the distort and simply stretch this text to make it a bit taller and take up some more space as part of the design. That looks pretty good for that one. Going to name this one so that I know which one it is when I export, and then I can add in another design next to it, and we'll keep going with our badges. This one I want to do kind of a left adjusted text design, which again is another predominant design style that we typically see out on Etsy. So I'm going to pull in a phrase. I like the humor in this one. My other outfit is glitter and hairspray, which again, when we think about the cheer world, this is something that we're specifically trying to connect to our ideal buyer, that they will really resonate with and say, yes, that I connect with, I can relate to that. It creates that emotional connection. So from there, we're keeping this as a simple text. I'm going to play around with some different fonts and see which one makes the most sense for this. I kind of like the really bold version of this text because it will really stand out. I actually decided I'm going to change this a little bit. So I really want to emphasize the glitter and the hairspray. So we're going to break this up into a couple text boxes. The first one will be my other outfit is, and then we'll change the back of this. I just want to be able to see the colors a little bit better. We'll do this as more of a darker design. I could also do a light version for light colored shirts as well, but for now we'll do dark. I'm going to add in another text box, and I'm going to do a totally different font for this. This is where I'm going to bring in and leverage the font duo concept. So I'm going to scroll through the script fonts and find one that's bold but slightly different and still has a script where I can play around with some color here. Because again, I really want the emphasis on those niche specific keywords. Got a gradient in there, and I think that works with the lighter color. So I'm going to duplicate this text again, and this will be my and then we will add in one more with the glitter, and we need our hairspray. So let's do duplicate glitter, add another word in the bottom here, and get that in. Now, because hairspray is such a long word, I actually want to find a script font that's going to not take up quite as much space, because I don't want this image to be fully off-centered once it's actually placed. So if we envision this like on our shirt, I want the spacing to be relatively close together so that it will still appear centered. So I like this smaller font. It still works with our gradient, and that looks nice. And we are moving right along. So now we've got quite a few different designs. These will each be different listings. So we're getting some really good designs in this batch. Let's go with another one. I want to incorporate some florals into this one because, again, florals out on Etsy right now have been in high demand in pretty much all of the niches for a very long time, and I don't see that changing. So we're going to do our own spin on this with some Kindle elements. If we look under the illustrations section of their elements, they have a lot of designs and elements that are categorized, which can be a nice way to find things. And there's a particular section that I know that they have, which is kind of an Art Deco style of florals, where you can independently change some of the colors. So it's this one. So Art Nouveau Flowers is the name of the elements section. You could also search for these as well. But these are nice because they're already the same style. They're from the same design family. So I'm going to just start layering in a few of these just for some initial placement for the design. once I've got an initial placement, then I want to bring in my text part of the design. So I'm actually going to just steal this from one of my previous designs, bring this in, and it's going to really appear here in a totally different way when I am done with it. So I want to change this. For this one, instead of coach, I'm going to change the main letters to cheer. And so same length, so that works out really well. I'm still retaining some of that border and initial outline. And then I'm going to, again, find a different color palette. I want to go for really this bright Y2K color scheme again. That is something that I'm seeing come up more and more in terms of just some really bright pops of color. And I think that works really well in this particular niche as well. So we're going to bring that in and just use this as our reference image to individually change the colors. And I like the order that these are already in. So by pulling in a palette like this, it makes it really fast and simple. I don't have to think about colors that coordinate or go together. I'm simply grabbing from these palettes that are already put together and work nicely. Then I want to go through and do the same thing for these florals. I want them to be in the same color scheme. And then once the colors are all changed, the other thing I want to do is I want to adjust these so that the flowers look like they're just kind of tucked behind the letters and don't have a ton of overhang that's visible in the background, because I want these to look like they're essentially part of and growing from these letters. So I might need to make a few changes along the way, make some adjustments, maybe bring in some slightly different versions, but I want this to look like it is one seamless image. Once this is done, get rid of my color reference. I'm going to add one final finishing touch, and that is to have Coach in the middle. And I did like the font that we used earlier, so I'm just going to grab that from the previous artboard and bring that down into this one and center it in front of and across those letters. Last finishing touches, and now we have a one complete batch that is ready for listing. Now, one approach to batching is to take one design style and simply scale it to a bunch of niches in one batch. And you can totally do that, and I used to do it that way when I first started. However, you probably noticed that when I'm working in batches, I actually focus on several different designs for the same niche or theme at one time. This is a pretty standard part of my process for a few reasons. Number one, I'm usually also researching niches one at a time instead of bouncing around to a bunch of different ideas and getting overwhelmed with lots of information. So it's going to be way easier to focus my time on one related theme when I'm actually designing as well. So for example, today's design batch was for a cheer coach based on the demand that I saw with some research in eRing and Etsy. My research for a cheer coach is going to look different than my research, let's say, for a volleyball coach, or something totally different like a dog mom. They're likely different customers, and I want to make sure I'm doing my due diligence with each of them. Number two, when I get to the steps of creating the actual listings with specific keywords and tags, I'm not constantly having to swap out a bunch of tags or keywords because I'm concentrating on one particular type of buyer at a time. So I can essentially infiltrate the niche that I just got done researching with several designs versus list one shirt for a dog mom, a separate listing and keywords for a volleyball coach, and so forth. I may be building out multiple niches in a general shop, but I'm doing them one at a time based on research and batching. And then number three, by trying out different design styles, one niche at a time, I can see which ones get the most potential attention. If I'm taking one single design concept and putting it on 100 different listings for 100 different types of buyers, I have no idea if that's a good design or not, it could be terrible. And I've just spent time putting it on 100 different listings. And if it's a more generic design, the odds of it resonating with someone in a specific niche is going to be pretty slim. Similarly, is creating 15 different product types with a design that's never been proven. That's creating volume for the sake of volume versus volume for the sake of learning and adjusting along the way. Prioritize coming up with different designs that you can experiment with, and then as you start to see clues of interest, for example, if a listing starts to get lots of favorites or even sales, then you have a more proven design concept, and then you can start scaling that design style in other ways. When you are scaling, do it strategically. Work in batches, and more importantly, base it on research and data so that your efforts are going to be the most effective. Both approaches for designing in batches ultimately can and do work, but when it comes to really minimizing overwhelm, working efficiently, and producing listings in a way that will more likely resonate with an ideal buyer, focusing on one niche at a time before moving on to the next can really help you grow more intentionally. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you want to take a deeper dive into my time blocking and batching methods, I'll link my full series on that below, where I have a separate video for each step of the process so that you can really see it in depth. I'm also super excited to share that later this summer, a brand new course will be launching inside my Simply Thrive Club membership, and it will be all about taking you from overwhelmed to in control so that you can unlock the secrets to managing your time, mastering your mindset, aligning your goals, and building habits of success that last in order to thrive in your Etsy business. In addition to all of the resources, templates, niche and trend reports, and group coaching that's already packed into the membership, each month I also host a new masterclass to cover the biggest topics related to operating a successful print-on-demand business. Access to the membership is always open, but be sure to be on the lookout for more information when the new course is available. Consider this your personal invitation to join me over in the club. In the meantime, be sure to check out my free print-on-demand course in the description. Stay focused, my friends. Keep taking action and never stop pursuing excellence in your business. Thanks for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and I'll see you in the next one.